The Jews of the Malagasy Republic. There is an island near the southeastern coast of Africa called the Malagasy Republic. The old name for this island was Madagascar. Near the eastern part of this island, on the Isle of Saint Marie, there exists a group of black Jews who call themselves Zafin Ibrahim, descendants of Abraham. Professor Alan H. Godbey says that the same alphabetic writing that was present in Palestine about 650 BC appeared at the same time in Malaysia. Moreover, he says, since the Hovas of Madagascar are members of the Malayan family who probably immigrated from Cambodia, this indicates the historical connection with the Jews of Madagascar. Like the Jews of Ethiopia, Uganda, and Wasambara, there are a multiplicity of Jewish cultural survivals, complexes, patterns, and traits found functioning among the Jews of Madagascar, such as the following. The day counted from sunset to sunset, many fast days, the eating of beef, the New Year festival, the making of a small fire on the first evening of the feast. They have rituals of purification of the people. They sprinkle blood of the New Year's ritual upon the doorposts. The latter ritual could be reminiscent of the Passover ceremony, which is observed in the month of Aviv. This month is the first month of the Jewish civil New Year. In this month, the kings of Israel were inaugurated. The North African Black Jews. In the year 331, that Alexander the Great defeated the Persian Emperor Darius at the Battle of Gaugamela, incorrectly called Arbela, a new master emerged on the world stage and transformed the history and culture of three continents. However, Alexander died in the prime of his life at age 32 because of debauchery and intoxication. Before the death of Alexander, his desire was to establish a Eurasian state. His scheme was to amalgamate the Greeks with the Asians. This was implemented by the widespread marriage of his troops with the colored women of the East. Most of his troops remained in the subjugated countries and became absorbed into the native population. After the death of Alexander, his vast empire was divided among his generals. Ptolemy received Egypt and Seleucus received Asia. As time elapsed, there was constant war between these two dynasties. By the year 198 BC, the descendants of General Seleucus had their capital in Syria, just north of Palestine. In this same year, the Seleucid dynasty in Syria compelled Egypt to give up Palestine, the land of the Jews. The king of Syria at the time was Antiochus III. When Antiochus IV usurped the throne in Syria 175 to 163 BC, he entertained the thought of uniting Alexander's empire. This meant the conquest of Egypt. However, the province that bordered on Egypt was Palestine, which stood in his way. At this time, the Jews would not accept Greek culture. Nevertheless, Antiochus was determined to Hellenize the Jews. The army of Antiochus marched into Palestine to support Menelaus, the leader of the pro-Syrian party. As a result, many Jews were killed. Others escaped to the hills and to Egypt. Only those Jews that supported Antiochus's policies remained in Jerusalem. An edict was promulgated interdicting the observance of the holidays, the Sabbath, and circumcision. A statue of Jupiter was erected in the Holy Temple above the altar. To this statue, the people brought the sacrifices of pig meat, the animal which is an abomination to the Jews. Because of this religious persecution, the legitimate high priest, Onias III, and many other Jews fled into African countries such as Egypt, Ethiopia, and Cyrenaica, Libya. Throughout the last 2,500 years, the main factors that have contributed to the social migration of the Jews were wars, religious persecution, and commerce. All these factors were operating and gave rise to the African Jewish population. In the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it had been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other, and there thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone. Deuteronomy 28:64. This prophecy and all the residue of the prophecies contained in Deuteronomy 28:15 through 68 befell the black Jews after they disobeyed the laws of God. Many nations transported the Jews into slavery, and the sons of Israel transmigrated to every continent. The Jewish philosopher Philo, about 40 BC to 40 AD, who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, said that 1 million Jews resided in Libya and Egypt from the Catabathmos to the borders of Ethiopia. Professor A.H. Godby said that Philo leaves us doubtful about which boundaries of Ethiopia he meant. I think that Philo meant the western and southern boundaries of Ethiopia, because the prophet Zephaniah mentioned, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, the daughters of my dispersed. There was a period of over 600 years between Zephaniah and Philo, and considering the new waves of immigrants coming into Africa, they had 600 years to penetrate toward all the borders of Ethiopia. F. Schuer wrote that Hebrewism was detectable by its inscriptions from the Egyptian border westward across North Africa to Mauritania. A. H. Godby says Jerome, 340 to 420 AD, one of the four doctors of the church, wrote that the Jews were spread from the western extremity of Mauritania to India. Now ancient Mauritania included part of the territory on the Atlantic Ocean, Morocco, and part of modern Algeria. It is certain that the Jews had migrated all across North Africa by the 2nd century. Some scholars fix the date earlier than this. The Greek historian and geographer Strabo, 63 BC to 24 AD, said concerning the Jews of Cyrene, Libya, "Now these Jews already have gotten into all cities, and it is hard to find a place in the habitable earth that has not admitted this tribe of men and is not possessed by it. And it has come to pass that Egypt and Cyrene, as having the same governors, and a great many other nations imitate their way of living, maintain great bodies of these Jews in a peculiar manner, privileged status, and grow up to greater prosperity with them, and make use of the same laws with that nation also." After the fall of the Carthaginian metropolis in North Africa, Roman power became dominant in the Barbary states. Under Roman suzerainty and power, the Jews of Asia and North Africa rebelled AD 115. The Jews considered themselves numerous enough to challenge Roman authority in the east and the south. Because of their numbers, the Jews almost subdued their adversaries who had compelled them to suffer many atrocities and indignities. Emperor Trajan sent his general Turbo to bring law and order. Instead of bringing law and order, the act of suppression of the insurrection brought a massacre. The suppression of the rebellion under the slogan of, quote, "law and order," end quote, may be good in principle, but a good thing may be carried too far. So it was in this case. The pagans and the Romans attacked the Jews indiscriminately, both the Jewish soldiers and the uninvolved peaceful population, without mercy. As a result of this merciless attack, many Jews fled to those parts of northwest Africa known as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. Many other Jews fled to the areas where Rome did not have any jurisdiction. This was to the region of the south, the Sahara Desert, and the Sudan. Grazel said, "Such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert first acquired Jewish tribes toughened by a fighting tradition and possessed of physical characteristics, blacks, which, it is said, still make them approximate very closely the original Jewish population of Palestine. The Jews are an omnipresent people. They seem to exist everywhere. At the beginning of the 6th century, they are found in Spain before the Mohammedan conquest. Spain is known to the Jews as the classical land of crypto Judaism because they feigned Christianity but practiced Jewish ritual in secret. As early as the Roman period, the Jews of Spain had been large in number and influential. Most of them claimed to be descendants of noble Jews in Jerusalem who had been carried into exile by General Titus. After the Visigoth, a Germanic tribe invasion, the situation ameliorated for the Jews because the Visigoths adopted the Arian form of Christianity and they favored the Jews. However, when they converted to Catholicism, they became zealous like any other neophytes. King Recarded ascended the throne in 589. This was the beginning of harsh religious enactments against the Jews. When King Sisebut or Sisbot occupied the throne, there was a prevalence of the most religious fanaticism. In 616 AD, the big shock came. The king ordered the baptism of all the Jews in his domain under the penalty of expulsion and the loss of all their property. According to Catholic authorities, 90,000 embraced Christianity at this time. This was forced baptism. In the 7th century, the Jews were threatened with the penalty of slavery if they were found practicing Judaism. This cruel policy caused many Jews to flee to the Mediterranean and western coast of Africa. The southernmost point of Spain, after you cross the sea, leads you to the northern or the western coast of Africa. Throughout the Middle Ages, many European governments expelled their Jews. These black Jews migrated to neighboring countries, Turkey and Africa. The Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. Deuteronomy 28:25. The Byzantine emperors in the 5th and 6th centuries persecuted the Jews constantly. Therefore, multitudes of Jews were compelled to migrate into the Sahara Desert to the south. By this time, the Sahara Desert was heavily occupied with black Jews. The Arabs pushed their way out of Arabia in the 7th century. In the year 640 AD, they attacked Egypt and continued across Africa. Then a Jewish queen named Dia Kahana organized an army consisting of Jews and Berbers in order to stop the penetration of the Muslims in North Africa. This queen vanquished the Arabs, and the people of Africa rejoiced in her victory. Years later, the Mohammedans fought the army of this Jewish queen once more, and she was defeated. She was defeated the second time because of the jealousies of different people in various tribes. Having become disgusted, her son turned Muslim and participated in the Islamic conquest of Spain in the year 711 AD. The Black Jewish Empire of Ghana. The ancient Black Empire of Ghana was established in the Western Sudan. During the colonial period, the Western Sudan was called French West Africa. The northern boundary of this region is the Sahara Desert. The western and southern border is Lake Chad. Some rivers of this region are the Senegal, the Gambia, the Volta, the Benue, the Lagon, and last but not least is the famous Niger River. This river flows from the Guinea highlands northeast to the famous cities of Timbuktu and Gao. Then it makes a sharp turn and flows southeast toward the city of Benin in Nigeria. In ancient times, the Carthaginians from North Africa penetrated the Sahara Desert and the western Sudan during the 2nd and 3rd centuries BC. When North and Eastern Africa had amassed over 1 million Jews, these Jews began a continuous migration to the region of the Niger River. According to the researchers of Nahum Slouch, the tradition of the Jewish traders in the Sahara stretches back to biblical times. Slouch continues, and it is not at all surprising to encounter in every part of the desert traces and even survivals of a primitive Judaism which at one time played an important role in the whole region of the Sahara from Senegal to the very borders of Somaliland. As I have mentioned earlier, this region that extends across from the entire width of Africa below the Sahara Desert from Senegal to Somaliland is known as the Sudan or Black Africa. Between the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the Black Jews of Arabia continued migrating across the Red Sea to Ethiopia. The largest exodus of the Jews occurred during the persecution by the Arabs led by Muhammad. He had said on his dying bed that he wanted Islam to be supreme throughout all of Arabia. There was a Jewish tribe called Rechab, which crossed the Red Sea and migrated to the extreme point of the western Sudan. At the same time that the Jews were migrating westward across the Sudan from Ethiopia, they also migrated southward from Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco to the fertile region between the Senegal and Niger rivers. When the Jews from the north and the east met between these two rivers, they established a confluence or crossroad in West Africa where men could exchange their culture, ideas, and merchandise. These Jewish migrations went on with great frequency about 300 AD, and they continued with the utmost regularity for 1,200 years. Joseph J. Williams points out that the course of the Jewish migration from northeastern Africa. He writes that the Jews migrated up the Nile, passing Memphis, Elephantine, Khartoum, and then they turned west at Kordofan in central Sudan. In the region of the West Nile, Williams thinks some Jews settled in the country of the Shilnik in the southern Sudan and Uganda. He continues by tracing the migration from Kordofan going west to Darfur, Lake Chad, Kano, and then to the countries of the Niger River. The original habitation of the Songhay people were Gonungia, Konka, or Kuka. This place was situated in the Dendi country and known as Dendina, lying near the Niger River on the northwestern border of what is now the modern state of Nigeria. Many scholars think that the Songhay people came from Egypt or Ethiopia because there exist many Egyptian culture complexes among them. For example, the preparation of the dead body for burial. Za el Yemeni came to Kuka about 300 AD, an ancient abode of the Songhay tribe. He established a line of kings known as the Za or Daja or the Dia dynasty. This founder of the first Sudanic dynasty in Western Africa was a black Jew. His name is sometimes written Zaal name Zaal Ayaman. Joseph J. Williams says that a citizen of Timbuktu named Abdurrahman S. Sadi wrote 1652 in his book Tariqa S. Sudan, History of the Sudan, that Za'ayel Ayaman was derived from Za min el Yemen, which means he is come from Yemen. Za el Yemeni came to the Niger country by way of Wargla in central Algeria. Wargla was a great trading center of the Black Jews. Dr. Barth and Professor Godby say that Za, the founder of the first Jewish dynasty, established his capital later at Gao on the eastern upper Niger River. The Arab Moors and the Sudanic writers attribute to the ancient black African Hebrews the establishment of the first empires, the erection of the first public buildings in the country, the construction of the first canals and irrigation systems, and the institution of a social economic regime which still survives in all Saharan communities. By what factors can we explain the emergence of Black Hebrew hegemony and leadership over the indigenous tribes? The answer is simple. The Jewish came into the Western Sudan from northern and eastern Africa as a result of a chain of commercial, and persecutory migrations. The Jews had settled among the most civilized people throughout the ages. They adopted new methods from other people and left their material, educational, and moral imprint among the people with whom they resided. For many centuries, the Hebrews had to employ great physical and psychological initiative. They could not afford to be complacent or apathetic. They were hated, so apathy could mean cultural stagnation or death. The Jews imported into the western part of Africa a superior, a superior material, educational, and moral culture soon after 300 AD, and this cultural advancement was not duplicated or exceeded until the ascendancy of the Mohammedan leader Mansa Kankan Musa of Mali in 1312 AD. In the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the Africans on the west coast did not possess the cultural superiority of the Africans on the north and east coasts. The black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of the black Jewish culture, the Jews were not absorbed into the autochthonous population. In fact, the Jews absorbed some of the native tribes. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematicians, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmiths, leather workers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmiths, agriculturalists, etc. The black Hebrew kings of Ghana had two titles: one, Kayamaga, master of gold, and two, Angana, war chief. Professor Godby says that 22-year-old Hebrew kings reigned in Ghana before the Hegria in 622 AD, and 44 had reigned by 790. Davidson makes mention of the Tariq el Fatah, History of the Researcher, which says that Kumbai had been the capital of the vast country of the Kayamaga, while the Tariq es Sudan states that Kayamanga had been the name of the first king of this country. It is apparent that all the kings of Ghana were called by the title Kayamaga. And concerning Kumbi, the ancient capital of Ghana, it was located in the southern part of the present country of Mali. During the Middle Ages, the name Ghana was not used to designate the country. The name of this country was Aukar, and Ghana was just the title of its kings. Having cognizance of this fact indicates the greatness and splendor of those kings, because after the decline of the Za dynasty, men began to call this country after the title of its kings, which is Ghana, and I shall do the same. In the 14th century, a Muslim writer named Ibn Battuta wrote about the women in one of the cities of Ghana. He found the women of Walata of surpassing beauty, and he should have known what he was talking about because he traveled widely. Moreover, he found another fact astounding. The women were given more respect than the men, and the males did not express any resentment or jealousy. The people did not trace their descent from a paternal head, but from their maternal brother. An individual bequeathed his legacy to his sister's sons. This material foundation of the Ghanaian state was based on the affluence of gold and iron. This use of iron in Africa, especially Ghana, revolutionized the social and military systems. El Zuri stated that the Ghanaians fought many wars against their neighbors, who did not use iron, but fought with bars of ebony. The Ghanaians could destroy their enemies because they fought with lances and swords. The king's revenue agents levied taxes on imports and exports, and the medium of exchange was gold. Concerning the kingdom of Ghana, Joseph Williams writes, "Whatever may be thought of the more or less mythological traditions connected with the earliest Jews in North Africa, it is now practically an established fact that a Jewish nation, Jewish at least in faith and perhaps too in origin, long held sway south of the Sahara." Eldad the Danite. In the 9th century, a black African Hebrew arrived in the city of Kairouan in Algeria. In this city was one of the famous Talmudic schools. The name of this Hebrew was Eldad the Danite. He told a credible story of a Hebrew empire south of the Sahara in the western Sudan. According to Eldad the Danite, the Hebrews in the interior of Africa spoke a Phoenician Hebraic language mixed with Arabic. They had a religion which had come down from Moses and a Hebrew emperor. It was believed that this emperor was named Tlotman, or Tlontin, or Belatan. Excuse me. Eldad said that the people of this tribe had fled from the kingdom of Israel after Sennacherib, the Assyrian, had subdued it, and that other Israelite tribes such as Naphtali, Gad, and Asher were in the land from which he came. He told of the laws of Moses, which they followed, the complete series of the scriptures except Esther and Lamentations. He did not speak of the legal works that were produced in Babylon and Palestine after the destruction of the first temple, of which the Algerian Jews had a knowledge. These extraordinary works were the Mishnah and the Talmud. Eldad displayed as evidence some ceremony pertaining to the slaughtering of animals for food. It was written in Hebrew with an Hebraic tinge, but Eldad claimed that he knew no other language than Hebrew. In regard to Eldad's story, the Gaon, head of the Jews, assured the people that the story was credible. We are grateful for the travels and researches of Nahum Slouch, who wrote in the early part of the 20th century. He said, "For many years, the author of this book has been gathering material for a history of the Jewish migrations into the Sahara in the Sudan. One part of his work is already done, the establishing of the authenticity of these migrations. To the writing of the Arabs and the oral traditions of the country, he can now add the archaeological evidence furnished by the ruins of ancient Jewish cities in the Sahara and the Sudan, and the documentary evidence of Hebrew inscriptions like those of Tuat, which date from the 13th and 14th centuries. It is now an established fact that Ghana was a black Hebrew state, and at this juncture I shall continue with my writings concerning the Za dynasty of Ghana. The 15th Za prince took control of the great city of Gao on the upper Niger, AD 1009. His name was Za Kasi or Kasoi. Up to this time, all the kings of Ghana professed the Hebrew religion. However, in this year, a radical transformation occurred. Za Kasi accepted Islam. David said, quoting the Tark el Fatash, says that the king of Songhay, Ghana, was persuaded to convert to Islam by the merchants of the city of Gao, who already had become wealthy and economically powerful. Much of Ghana's trade was maintained with the Muslims of the north. The North Africans were ardent Mohammedans in their day, and economies and religion were co-partners, operating concertly in the city of Gao. I do not condemn Zakasi for his conversion to Islam. In fact, I shall justify his actions. The Muslims were dominating Ghana's vital trade links in North Africa and the Sahara, and it was good for Ghana's security to be recognized as having a Mohammedan king. Concerning Islam in the Western Sudan, Basil Davidson makes the following observation. Islam reaches the markets of the Western Sudan by at least the 9th century, but it makes little initial impact. The rulers of Ghana do not accept Islam as one of their state religions. Only at the beginning of the 11th century are there a few such conversions, the earliest of any importance of which we know being that of the king of Gao, traditionally in 1010, followed by that of the king of Kanem Bornu in 1086. Davidson says, these are tactical conversions. These kings are Muslims only in name, motivated as much by commercial conveniences as by appreciation of the political and religious achievements and teaching of Islam. In spite of the fact that the kings of Ghana professed Islam, many of the inhabitants remained Jews. El Briki or Bekri, the Muslim writer, wrote about Ghana in 1067. The king of Ghana in his day was Tenk-Amin, who came to the throne AD 1062. El Berki or Bekri says that the king of Ghana, Tenkamen, was the ruler of a great empire, and he was able to organize an army of 200,000 men. In the 11th century, a Mohammedan people from the northwest invaded the city of Ahugast within the Empire of Ghana. These invaders were called the Almoravides. By the year 1076 AD, Abu Bakr, the leader of the Almoravides, captured the capital of Ghana. However, the Islamic Jewish king was allowed to maintain his throne. Tentamen paid tribute to Abu Bakr. At this time, Gao or Gaho, the capital of Ghana, was separated into two cities. The first one was the residence of the king. This city contained a fortress, which was surrounded by a wall. The second city contained 12 mosques, in which Mohammedan merchants could settle or wait until they transacted their business. This description given by El Bakri or Bekri leaves us with the impression that the city of the king's residence was probably inhabited mainly by Jews, because there was a great distinction between the king's residence and the residence of the Mohammedans. In the city of Gao, the Islamic region was influential. Only a Muslim king could be king. When a new king ascended the throne, three royal imperial emblems constituting the Quran, a sword, and a ring were received by the king. Ahmed Baba, a native of Sanghay, dates the beginning of Islam in Ghana after the year 1010. El Bekri designates the then reigning king as Khanda. Barth says that he is most probably identical with the Islamic Jewish king Za Bayuki or Bearokoi Kaima of Ahmed Bama, the third succeeding king of Za Kasi. End of chapter 5, part 3.